Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick and this is MSFS Flight Plans, and we're going to do something a little bit different today than we usually do. I'm going to do a tutorial, a helicopter tutorial. As you guys know, if you've been around the channel for a while, most of the time we're just cruising around the world looking for the absolute best looking, most interesting, coolest spots on the planet, all for the singular purpose, at least in my opinion, of getting you guys to fly up in the air one more time to check out all these sites. Hopefully even flying them just like we're flying them, and if we're real lucky, you'll even take the exact same aircraft we're flying, and therein is the rub. As you guys know, I've been flying helicopters quite a bit over the last month, and the reason why is because when we get down to the big cities where we want to go really nice and really slow, maybe even come to a complete standstill and be able to see lots and lots of stuff out of the big bubble canopy, it's hard to beat the helicopters. And originally, in my naivety, I thought maybe if people are seeing me fly the helicopters, they'll want to try flying them a little bit more. And some of you guys I already know how to fly them, especially you guys that have helicopters for your avatars. And if those are you guys, then great. You already know everything I'm about to tell you. You can go and check out some of our other flights. But for all the rest of you, I've gotten a lot of comments from folks saying, you know, that was a neat flight, but I tried the helicopters. It was just too hard. I didn't get it. I don't fly them anymore. And that just breaks my heart, because flying these things for me has been like becoming a simmer all over again. I'd forgotten what it was like to not know how to do anything, not be able to control anything, just have to learn it all from scratch. I've loved that journey. And if I can make it just a little bit easier for you guys to give these one more shot, then this video will be a huge success. So obviously there's plenty of helicopter tutorial videos out there. That's how I learned to fly these things, but I thought it might be a little easier if I condense all of the information I got from the 15 or 20 or so videos that I watched down into one video. So there's videos out there for how to set up the sim for helicopters, how to configure your controls, how the dynamics of these things work, what the controls do, how to fly them, all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm just going to try to stuff it all into one video. When I got the first comments, I was like, well, just check out the tutorial videos. They're out there. And I thought, well, that's a lazy man's way to do it. I'm just going to make a tutorial video for you guys. So that's what we're doing here. And with the disclaimer that at this point, I probably have 40 to 50 total hours of airtime in the helicopters. Only been flying them again for a little over a month now. So I'm not an expert by any means. I don't fly these in real life. Obviously, I don't fly anything in real life yet. So I think that may be an advantage, because sometimes when you've just learned something for the first time, you remember what it took to get you to that point. So I can recall the humps that I crossed where I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand how that works. And sometimes once you've been doing it for a while, you get real comfortable with it. You forget what you didn't know. And I'm still acutely aware of what I didn't know. So I'm going to try to explain all this in the simplest, easiest layman's terms I can think of. And that being said, I will use words that may not be the correct technical terms. Although at this point, I do know what the technical terms are. I do have a pretty good understanding of the physics of how these work, the controls, how all that stuff works. But I'm going to try to keep it really, really simple. If you want to take a deeper dive, again, plenty of videos out there to describe how that stuff works. This is an absolute beginner's guide from someone who still considers himself an absolute beginner. So the helicopter that we're using for this one is the Mini 500 by Got Friends. It is a payware helicopter, but I think this is probably the best starter helicopter because it is so incredibly simple. You don't even have to figure out which side you're going to sit on, because there's only one seat in this thing. Controls are simple. The dash here is simple. All of your gauges are simple. There's one that's even simpler, and that is that new one from Indie Builds, but it's so simple it doesn't even have a vertical speed indicator, which you don't need to use a lot in helicopters, but it helps to kind of get feedback for the inputs that you're putting in. So this one's pretty good for that. All right, so before we even get this thing started up, let me tell you how to let the sim help you make this as easy as possible. So the first thing we're going to do is hit the escape key, or whatever it takes to get to your menus, hit the assistance options, and there's two helicopter assists that you want to make sure you have on. Obviously, for all the planes, I've been flying long enough that I like to keep it super realistic, and I like it to be as challenging as possible. I'm not there yet with the helicopters. So scroll on down here to these two options right here, the assisted tail rotor and the assisted cyclic. That's the same thing as what you might call a flight stick in an airplane, and I'll explain why it's called a cyclic in just a minute. Turn those two things on. It'll help you out a lot. Next, we'll go over to our controls. And this is where I was really screwing up. Being a typical guy, I didn't figure I needed to read the instruction manual. Because I think you can get up in the air. I'm trying to think back to when I first started doing it. I think you can pretty much get them at least off the ground using your same settings that you have for your airplanes. But it works properly, and as a helicopter should, when you change those over to the correct helicopter settings. So the first thing we're going to do is get our collective set. And I do have an actual collective now. If you guys have been watching, you know that over the holidays, I got full helicopter controls. So I have a collective, I have a flight stick, and of course I had pedals already. So the collective is something that would probably work if you used your throttle setting. It might make the collective work inside the helicopter, but it's probably not doing what a collective is supposed to do, because with helicopters, you really don't fool with the throttle at all once you're ready to take off, and you don't touch it again until after you land and you're ready to shut the thing down. So let's expand these real quick here, and let me go to my collective, not my head tracker. Let me go over some more. All right, so here's the collective. It'll take a second for that to open up. Really likes to think about it. Make sure I want to go to the collective. So there's something called a collective axis under power management. Have that set to something that feels very natural for what the collective is doing. If you have a throttle quadrant, I would set it to whatever you're using for your throttle in such a way that when you move the throttle up or forward, it raises the collective in the sim. So set that up, check it, go back into your cockpit, see if when you raise your throttle or whatever you are using for your throttle, whatever lever that is, that when you do that, it lifts the collective, which is this thing down to the left side of the seat that I'll show you in just a second. The other thing that you're going to have set up is your trims. You will be trimming constantly in a helicopter. In fact, almost of the flight controls are just the collective in trimming. A little bit different from an airplane in that regard, if not entirely different. Under control trimming surfaces, you will want to set these for the same settings that you use in your plane as if you were trimming nose up or nose down. For a helicopter, they're called the rotor longitudinal trim. So you have an increase and a decrease. If you want to pitch the plane forward, so a nose down trim, link that map that button over to decrease rotor longitudinal trim. So for me, for my planes, when I push it forward, it pushes the nose down because that feels very natural. So set whatever pushes your nose down in the plane, it's going to do the same thing in the helicopter. That'll be your decrease trim. Flip it around for the increase. So for me, when I push my thumb back, that pitches the nose up. So that would be your increase trim. All right. And I actually have this mapped over to 2 spots, one on my collective and then one on my flight stick in case I have to switch hands while we're pointing at things with our mouse. For all of this other stuff, I originally mapped it over because I watched a tutorial that said map this to that, but I just touch all this stuff with my mouse inside the cockpit. You only touch it once while you're flying, so I don't have that mapped to anything. And if I do, I don't even know what the buttons are anymore. All right, going to the flight stick or whatever you're using for a flight stick. The things you want to do with this one is your lateral trim. Unlike most airplanes, unless you're flying a turboprop with a ton of torque in it, like the Porter or something like that, you want to make sure you don't fly off the runway, you usually don't mess with your rudder trim. With this, you will be messing with your lateral trim quite a bit. Once this thing gets up to power, you'll find it has a tendency to roll to the left or right, depending on the direction of rotation of that main rotor, and you're going to want to be able to fix that. So if you actually do use your rudder trim a lot, I have it set so that if I want to roll back to the left, it's the decrease rotor lateral trim. So it's a left-right button on my flight stick. So when I move it to the left, it will roll me back over to the left if that's what I need to do. And the inverse for the right. So that's how you'll have those things set up because you're going to want to be able to do that unless you're going to want to fight that the whole time you're flying. As far as your primary control surfaces for your stick, which is called the cyclic in the helicopter, set it up so that whenever you move the thing to the left, it moves it to the left in the sim, right to the right, forward, backwards. So just get those all dialed in so that it moves the direction you're actually moving your external controls, and that will just be very natural and very intuitive as well. And then lastly, your pedals. These are called anti-torque pedals, not rudder pedals in a helicopter. I don't know why this is taking so long to switch between. Oh, maybe that's why I didn't put it on the right thing. Don't leave it as rudder control settings. They have something called a tail rotor axis. So map those over so that when you press on the left one, inside your cockpit, the left one goes forward and vice versa. And that's going to feel about the same way as using your rudder controls in an airplane once we're moving forward. A little bit different while we're standing still. So that's how everything will be mapped over. If you want to find a specific tutorial about how to map everything over, there's plenty of those out there. These are the main things you need to worry about. All the other stuff I control with my mouse inside the cockpit. Because as you're going to see, you'll be using both feet, both hands, and your thumbs the entire time you're flying this thing. You're not going to be fiddling with anything else, which is great because you usually don't have to unless you're sitting on the ground. Okay, so that's that. Let's go ahead and get it started up, and I'm going to give you a quick tour of the cockpit here so you'll know what everything does. I just need to remember to turn my alternator back on. And we're at Niagara International Airport right now. We're going to fly right over to the falls. I do have my Jeppesen Niagara Falls pack installed, which is absolutely awesome. If you saw our Niagara Falls flight, you got a little preview of that. But there's a heliport over there, and there's another one up by the Whirlpool, which will probably land at that one too. All right, so again, anti-torque pedals here. Call them rudder pedals if you want. Just don't say it to a helicopter pilot or you might get backhanded. Anti-torque pedals. This is called the cyclic, not the stick. In a helicopter, it's called a cyclic, and I'll tell you why in just a second. This thing down here is your collective. And on the end of the collective, this thing is kind of like a motorcycle throttle, and in helicopters, it works the same way. This is the throttle. You move it usually that way to increase the throttle, this way to decrease the throttle. All right, let me get my camera reset here. Okay, so kind of a walkthrough of what we're going to be doing, just so you'll know, as we're doing it, how all this stuff works. Let's go ahead and get our GPS set up, even though we're not going to use that. We're going to look at this map right here. Okay, so in an airplane, you control your forward motion and your speed by the throttle. Again, just to keep beating this horse until it's completely dead and bloody. In a helicopter, once you get the throttle set before takeoff for almost all of them, except the really old helicopters, you don't touch the throttle again until you're done and you're shutting the thing down. So one less thing to have to worry about. The speed and the movement of the helicopter is controlled primarily by the collective, which is that thing down to our left. And all that thing is doing, it's not increasing the speed of the rotor spin, it's changing the pitch of the rotor blades. And it's called a collective because it changes the pitch of all of them at the same time. Your cyclic, on the other hand, is called a cyclic because it changes them in sequence. It's a cyclical pitch control. And I won't go really deep into the physics of how that works. I encourage you to check that out if you're a geek like me, but the way that it works, in the simplest terms I can explain it, is that it will change the pitch of the rotors one at a time as they're crossing a single point on their path around that central mast. So to try to conceptualize what that's doing, if I move my cyclic to the left, it's going to increase the pitch of the rotor blades as they're coming around the right side of the helicopter so that it provides more lift to the right side, thereby rolling us to the left. So it's called the cyclic because it's changing them one at a time as they're flying around there, which is an incredibly simple but incredibly complex bit of machinery that does that. Also absolutely fascinating. All right, so that's what's going on with those things. The anti-torque pedals are controlling the pitch of the tail rotor. And the only thing that tail rotor does is try to counteract the torque forced down into the body of the helicopter by that big, huge, heavy blade spinning around on the top of us. Without that thing providing any rotational force or anti-rotational force in the opposite direction of that spin, as soon as we get off the ground, this thing would just start spinning like crazy in the opposite direction that top rotor is spinning. So that tail rotor will adjust its own pitch as you move your anti-torque pedals to either increase or decrease the force against that torque, thereby allowing the helicopter to pivot while you're not moving or yaw just a little bit while you're moving forward. And I'll show you how all that works once we get in the air. Okay, so that's the basics of the controls. That's the basics of the physics of how this thing works. Now let's talk about what we're going to do once we get up off the ground. To get up off the ground, what I usually do is just start lifting the collective till I come up a little bit, and then I'll get into a hover state. And initially we'll hit something called the ground effect area, which is about the distance of the diameter of your top rotor blade from the ground. And the best way to think about what's going on with the ground effect is imagine a hovercraft. The physics of it in helicopter is different than a hovercraft, but you know with a hovercraft, once you turn the engines on that blow that air down underneath you, it'll almost start riding on a little cushion of air. But once you get to a certain point, no matter how much more force you apply to that, it just won't get that much higher because it's above that little cushion area. Theoretically, that's kind of what's going on with a helicopter. That's a good way to imagine it. From a literal physical standpoint, there's something a little bit different than that going on. Again, check that out in more detail if you want. It's absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to lift our collective a little bit here. Just start hovering a bit. And you'll see it's going to start coming up. It will pitch forward a little bit. I'm not touching my cyclic at all, my flight stick at all right now. And then I'm not touching the collective anymore. And then it just stops. We're getting out of that ground effect zone. It may even start to sink back down a little bit. So if we just leave it like this, I can even drop it a little bit. It'll come back down some, and then it'll stop coming down once it hits that ground effect area. And it'll just start hovering again. So there we go. We're in the ground effect area right now. So while we're not moving forward or backwards or any other direction, if we adjust our anti-torque pedals, you'll see it pivots very smooth, very, very easy. Or yaws, if you want to use the correct term. And if I stop, just stops. No problem. Go the other way. Same thing. Very smooth and easy. Now once we start moving forward and get that air flying all around the outside of our airframe here, it's going to feel a lot more like a rudder pedal in an airplane. Because all that air flowing around this thing makes it want to keep pointing straight ahead. If you're going forward and you are too aggressive with your pedals down there, you'll feel it snap back like a rubber band to the forward position, and I'll show you that once we get going too. But while you're not moving forward, it's very smooth, very easy. The only time I ever use my anti-torque pedals is when I'm going very, very slow on takeoff and landing, or if I'm trying to do some kind of wild maneuvering while we're in the air, which I very rarely do. All right, so that's how that stuff works. We're still coming up a little bit because I raised our collective a little bit more, increasing the pitch of that main rotor, providing more downward thrust. Again, not changing the speed of the main rotor, just changing the pitch of those blades. And this is the first area where everybody screws up their helicopter flights, and I know that because it's exactly what I did, and I can tell that's what's going on by the comments I'm getting. The impulse is just to push forward on the stick, and if you do that, it will start moving forward. But if you're not trimming it, as soon as you start coming back on that stick, it's going to just jerk up into the air. So what I do to make it nice and smooth as easy, I'm not going to touch my cyclic at all. I'm not even touching the stick. I'm just going to start trimming forward a little bit. And you'll see we're going to start coming forward. But as we do that, we're going to hit a point where it starts to sink again. And the reason why that's happening is you can imagine all that downward thrust that was going perpendicular to the earth, pushing straight down against the force of gravity. Now some of that is being deflected back behind us. So we're losing some of that vertical lift as we start to nose forward a little more. You can see on our VSI over there, we're starting to come down. So now we just need some more thrust. I'm going to pull up on the collective a little bit. As we do that, it'll nose back up. I still have not touched my flight stick at all. So to counteract that nose up, I'm just trimming down again, and now we're getting that right side roll. You see that? Haven't touched my stick at all. It's rolling to the right now. So now I'm going to use that other trim with my left thumb. Just sort that out a little bit. Nice and easy. Nothing fast in the helicopter. You jerk this thing around, you'll be out of control in no time. So I'm going to get up to about 1,500 feet, and then we will make a turn. So I'm just watching my vertical speed, adjusting the collective as I start to come down too much. As the nose comes up, I just trim down some more. And you'll see as you do that, you keep increasing the collective, keep pitching down, it'll start gaining the forward momentum on its own. So I'm going to try to hit vertical or horizontal flight, just stabilize at level flight at around 1,500 feet. Looks like we're tracking just fine for that. Still have not touched my flight stick at all, other than adjusting the trim. Alright, so I'm just trimming down till we get in roughly stable flight here. Adjust the collective a little bit. So now if you want to turn, I'm going to give it the slightest little input on my cyclic. I mean, I'm moving like a millimeter to the left. Look how smooth and easy that is. That's all you have to do, not touching my pedals at all. Nice and easy. I mean, I am just barely touching it. I could probably blow on it to get it to turn this much. And the thing about helicopters is, initially I was watching my vertical speed indicator constantly, and it was just going nuts because it's really hard to peg that thing. With helicopters, you just kind of look out the window and get a feel for how everything's looking, and you'll get the hang of it after a while, but just looking out the windshield is about the best way to get a sense of everything that's going on. Just move everything nice and slow and easy. So I'm going to get this thing to about 100 knots, which is the cruise speed. Decrease my trim a little bit. Point that nose down some. I guess increase it. Still turning around a little bit because we want to get headed back towards the falls over there. Pitch the nose down some more. Keep that speed coming up. Each time I pitch the nose down, it goes a little bit faster. If I'm starting to come down too much, I just come up on the collective a little bit, provide a little bit more thrust for us. Alright, so now that we're moving in a forward direction, I'm going to use my pedals just to show you what the effect is like. It's very similar to an airplane. So go to the left. Yes, it will turn to the left, but you can see it's kind of trying to fight and it's starting to roll a little bit. And then if I just let go, it snaps right back like an airplane does. Gives that rubber band effect. So I'm going to take my feet back off the pedal again because I don't like controlling this with the pedals because there's really no need to. Just barely touching that stick just to get it nudged back over in the right direction. Nice and smooth and easy. Everything can be smooth and easy. Alright, those buildings over there are Niagara Falls, so we're going to head over in that direction. So if you really want to increase your speed real quick, you can go ahead and nose down. As you're doing that, pull up on the collective, just keep nosing down, adjust that trim down, and you can see our speed going up. Now watch what happens if I just drop the collective. Nose down, but our speed is going to start increasing really fast. Because we just dropped all of that thrust that was moving us forward, so it just says, okay, you want me to go down? I'll go down. It just tips forward like that. But something else is pretty interesting about these. There's two ways you can slow down really fast if you want to. One, I'm going to leave the collective right where it is. I'm just going to pull back on the stick. And what that's doing, you can imagine all that thrust being thrown back slightly behind our center of axis now, which is propelling us forward. Well, if we tip that axis in front of us, yes, we're going to climb a little bit, but watch how fast our airspeed is going to drop. Now it's pushing that thrust out in front of us, and you can see that airspeed's coming down, but we're also climbing at 2,000 feet a minute, which is not really what we want to be doing, so let's just tip that back down again. And you can see it's easy to lose control. I'm having to pull back on the stick real hard just to get control of this thing again. So again, no fast movements, just everything nice and easy. Alright, so I'm going to trim up a little bit. Keep trimming up. And I'm going to try to get our airspeed at about 80 knots. Alright, so our first helipad is going to be on this side of the river, right next to a beautiful little bridge we're going to have over here, so we'll try to put this thing down over there, and I'll talk to you about landing a little bit. I want to get to the point where I don't have to put any forward or back pressure on my cyclic, so I'm just trimming to make that happen. So I'm pulling back a little bit now. I don't want to be pulling back. If I let go, it's going to dip down, so I'm just trimming up again. Every input you give means you usually have to adjust something else at the same time. So if I'm trimming down, I have to adjust the collective. If I'm trimming up, I have to adjust the collective. You're also having to trim left and right a little bit as you're increasing the power to this thing. Alright, so we're going a little slower than I'd prefer, so I'm going to nose down, give it some collective as we do that, which will bring the nose back up. And I'm going to get pointed in the general vicinity of where that helipad is, and I have not landed at any of these helipads yet because I haven't flown helicopters out here with my add-on included, so this will be fun for all of us to do together. So as you're coming in for your landing, it's a good idea to be around 40 knots or even slower. Don't try to Magnum PI this or Airwolf or whatever you watched back in the 1980s until you become a seasoned pro, because you will absolutely lose control, probably overshoot the helipad. Everything just nice and easy. Alright, I'm going to increase the speed a little bit just so I can show you how quick we can slow down if we want to. So I'm pulling the collective up, and I'm trimming up as I do that. And of course, this time of year, it's probably snowy up here. I lived in Buffalo for a year, so about half the year there's snow over everything and the river's frozen except for the falls. Okay, so our helipad should be just on this side of that bridge, on this side of that little plaza there, right by it. So just barely giving a little left input on our cyclic. Alright, so we're about twice as fast as I want to be, but I do want to start coming down too, and as we start coming down, we'll probably maintain our airspeed, but I don't want to just nose down, so as I do that, I'm going to be trimming back up, so we'll slow down as we're lowering the collective. Again, dropping the collective reduces the overall thrust. Nosing back up, we'll keep that thrust either below us or in front of us, which is going to slow us way down. So I'm dropping my collective, and look what's going on with our vertical speed indicator. Because I'm pointing forward, even though I'm dropping the collective, we're still not losing any altitude. Once our forward momentum stops, then we'll start settling down. Alright, so now I'm going to trim all the way back, all the way nose up, and I can just counteract that by lowering that collective some more. Alright, I think our pad is going to be that thing right on the other side of that little red building right above our console right there. So we'll nose down some to get a little bit of forward speed. Alright, so now that little bullseye thing right there below my turn coordinator, you see that little dot that's just starting to come into view? If that's in front of the center of the bullseye, that means that we're going to land somewhere out in front of us. We're going to keep moving forward. We want to get that to where it's right below us. Once it's right below us, we know if we keep coming down, we will land right on the dot. I think that's a helipad there. We're about to find out. Try to avoid that crane. So you want to be coming in gentle enough that when you get very, very close to your landing spot, you're almost in a total hover, so that you can get this very, very well controlled. So you're just barely moving as you're putting the inputs in. Alright, it feels like it's wanting to nose up, so I'm just trimming down a little bit. And from here I'm going to take over controls. I'm not going to trim anymore, I'm just going to use my cyclic to control everything. Alright, so I'm going to get down to about the level I want to be to come over the pad. I need to slow down a little bit more. And I'm going to start pulling up on our collective once we get down low enough so that I don't descend any further. And try to avoid, what is that, a little light or something over there? That's a funny looking helipad, isn't it? But I think that's it. Alright, see our little bullseye dot? Getting closer to the center there. That's what we want to see. We're still going forward, so that's fine. Alright, so now I'm going to use my anti-torque pedals just a little bit to get us lined up a little bit better for that thing. And I don't like to just plop it right down on there. I want to just be hovering a couple feet off of the pad and then just very, very gently set it down. Alright, so I'm really working the collective right now, trying to compensate for the descent. That's a little too much, so we'll pull back on the collective. Just get to where we're barely hovering over the pad up here. And then once you're just barely hovering, you have a lot of control with your cyclic. And we'll just put her down. We're getting that ground effect area. There we are. So now we got to drop the collective a little bit more. Ease it down just with the collective. Okay, so if you were a true professional, you could do that even better than I did. What I'm going to do now is completely reset my trims. I've got a button that will do that, and if you have one of those, it might be helpful just so you can make sure you're zeroed out again if you want to do one of these. So now what we're going to do is take a flight up over the falls, come back around to that other helicopter pad, and I'm going to show you probably the typical, the impulsive way to fly a helicopter if you're not familiar with the controls and what all of them are doing. So I'm going to take off, and I'm not going to trim it at all. I'm going to get going forward by moving the stick forward and do all my controlling from there. All right, you ready? Here we go. Collective up. And stick forward. And you will get going. It's not immediate. It takes a little bit of second. You know, you're fighting the inertia of this thing. So I'm putting a lot of forward pressure on the stick now. And once you do get going forward, you can move the stick to the left and the right, and it'll do what you expect it to do. So at this point, you might be feeling, all right, I got this. I got it. I'm going to lean left. It'll go left. That's fine. We're getting a little bit of stuttering because there's so much going on with this add-on pack. But look at those falls. Look at that rainbow down there. Awesome. All right, so I've got a lot of forward pressure on my stick right now. And if I really want to get going fast, I can just keep that forward pressure down there. Have not trimmed anything. But watch what's going to happen as soon as I let off that forward pressure on my cyclic. Ready? Oh boy. And that's where most people just completely lose control of the helicopter. So that's why it's all about the trim on this thing. So now I'm just tipping the nose back down. Now I'm going to trim it out a little bit. Trim it, drop my collective some. Just keep it under control. Get it under control. I still got some forward pressure, so I need to trim the nose down some. Okay, so now I've got a pretty much neutral stick again. And you can see we are at almost a flat line on our vertical speed indicator, which is where we want to be. I'm trimming the nose down some. And we'll cruise over here to our other pad, and this time I'm going to come in low and really fast to show you how to do that real quick slowdown if you feel like you want to just get a wild hair and try doing it. Look at those buildings. Unbelievable. This is such a cool add-on. Got the Ferris wheel down there. Alright, so I'm going to nose down so I can pull up on the collective, because if I don't nose down and pull on the collective, we'll just nose right up. So nosing down, pulling up on the collective. Nosing down some more. I'm going to see if we can get up to 100 knots again before we get to our next pad. We'll buzz the little Ferris wheel here. Wave to everybody in the tower over there. Alright, so we're at 100 knots, and this next landing pad is going to be up here by the whirlpool, so we'll just follow the river this way a little bit. I'm going to come in really slow or really fast and really low. So I'm just lowering my collective, and I'm not going to bring the nose up because I want to keep our airspeed. Pulling back on the stick just a little bit. Alright, so now I'm going to trim the nose up just to get in a slightly more level flight. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is pull the stick back again, and then I'm going to lift the collective to send a whole bunch of thrust out in front of us, and we're going to slow down really fast as we're doing that, and I'm going to see how little altitude I can gain, and you really have to coordinate your stick movement and that collective to get this to work right without shooting up in the air. Alright, so I'm just barely going to give it any collective, and then nose up. I'm even dropping the collective a little bit. Look how quick we're losing airspeed there. And we're also losing altitude, which is perfect. So look at that. We went from 100 knots to under 40 knots in a matter of seconds. Alright, so our helipad is right on the other side of that little circus tent looking thing. We'll see how close we can get to those guys. There's probably some people hanging out down there, eating their popcorn, having a good time. See if we can blow their hair around. Oop, let's not hit that Canadian flag. That would be sacrilege. Alright, so there's the pad right on the other side of it, dropping the collective. Pulling the stick back, slow us way down. And we go forward again, give it a little more collective as we level it back out. We'll come right over the top of this thing and we'll put her down. So right now I'm mainly just working that collective, making sure I'm not going up too much, coming down too much. Any people down there? Oh yeah, they are. They're hanging out down there. Look at the flags moving around. Incredible. right, let's see how close I can get to this building. Well, you have to get pretty close to get down this pad, don't you? All right, sir, little bullseye. Working that collective. Make sure we're not coming down too fast. Come right over the top of this thing. Tip forward just a little bit. Get our bullseye right in the center. We're going to get the ground effect here in just a second. There it is. And then just come on down. Nice and easy with that collective. Nice and easy. And down we go. All right, so that's it, guys. Just a quick recap. Nothing fast, everything nice and easy. You could probably fly this whole thing without ever touching your cyclic if you just adjusted the trim. If you're doing any hard turns, you'll probably have to use your stick just a little bit, but it's all about the trim. I think that's the biggest mistake. Get your helicopter settings set up correctly. Let me turn this thing off so it's not so loud. Hit the rotor brake. So get your assist on. Get your settings mapped over for the controls for all the helicopter settings. Don't do anything quickly and rely on your trim. Everything is about the trim in these things. And every input means you're probably going to have to adjust something. So if you pull the cyclic up, you got to trim down. If you're putting too much power in, you might have to trim left or right. But you will get the hang of it. It's all about the trim. The jerky motions, losing control really quick, is probably the biggest discourager from people flying the helicopters once they get in and just try to wing it. No pun intended, since we don't have any wings. But that's the name of the game. Just do it all with the trims. That's the secret. Hope this has been a help, guys. I'd love to hear how you're doing. If you give it a shot, if you learned anything from this, that's just absolutely great. Let me know. I hope to see you guys in helicopters, and I can't wait to see you again in the skies. Later.